Hey guys, tonight, we wake beneath a fig tree, your face brushed softly by a drowsy morning breeze, and just beyond the shade, the sun glints off something strange, an altar crusted with golden resin beeswax and, yes, a few suspiciously sticky offerings. Clay bowls filled with honey, little carved cakes shaped like what is that, a bee, or a slightly embarrassed cherub? Either way, you're definitely not in Kansas or Athens. You're somewhere much, much sleepier. You probably won't survive this unless you're the kind of person who thinks wandering barefoot through thyme-scented fields while ancient gods turn into insects is peak relaxation. In which case, welcome. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I promise not to judge if it's 3 a.m. and you're lying next to a cat who has absolutely no respect for your sleep schedule. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle closer to the altar sandals, squishing faintly in soft mud. The stone is old, like someone sneezed during the Bronze Age, and this altar caught it kind of old. The bees circle overhead, not threatening, more curious, like librarians who sense you haven't properly washed your hands before flipping a papyrus scroll. A small boy with a crooked nose and a staff gestures you forward. "Do you want to hear the story?" he whispers. "The one about when Zeus turned into a swarm of bees." You nod because saying no feels illegal in this moment. He begins with the bees. According to tradition, this very hillside once echoed with hymns not sung by people but by hives, sacred buzzing that rose with the sunrise and lulled shepherds to sleep by dusk. Ancient Babylonians had their stars, Egyptians had their cats, and the Greeks. They had Himedian bees whose honey was so pure it glowed blue in moonlight. Or so the bards swore, which means it's probably mostly true. A mainstream historical fact. Sure, bees and honey were deeply sacred in the ancient Mediterranean. Honey was used in rituals, medicines, even mummification. Aristotle himself wrote about bees with the same intensity modern influencers reserve for skincare routines. But the myth, oh the myth. That's where things get sleepy. You sit cross-legged in dry grass, already regretting your decision to wear white. The boy continues. They say the altar you're sitting beside once belonged to Melissa, priestess of the bee cult of Hymettus. She led her followers in rites that celebrated fertility nectar. And this part's a little fuzzy. Something involving echo chambers and secret dances in tunnels shaped like honeycombs. Quirky fringe tidbit. Some scholars claim Melissa wasn't a priestess at all, but a nymph who transformed into the first bee after accidentally tasting divine ambrosia. Supposedly, she lived in a hollow tree and taught bears how to harvest honey politely. Historians still argue whether Melissa was a historical priestess, later mythologized, or just a mythological figure entirely created to explain why little girls in temple rites were called bee maidens. Either way, she's central to the story you're about to hear. As the boy speaks, you glance back at the altar. A single bee lands on your hand. Its wings shimmer like spun glass. You do not swat it. Instead, you follow it with your eyes as it rises, spiraling higher, drifting toward a cluster of purple crocuses, and for just a moment you swear the petals part like tiny lips. Exhaling a whisper you can almost understand. Tomorrow, you'll blame it on pollen or low blood sugar. But tonight, you listen. Because when the gods get bored or jealous or just itchy for a little chaos, they do not throw tantrums. They transform. And Zeus, king of thunderpicker, of lovers, ruiner, of peaceful naps, once decided that to reclaim mortal devotion, he had to become something irresistible. Something golden. Something that hums and stings and dances in 8 directions before breakfast. Yes, he chose to become a swarm of bees. And you've stumbled into the beginning of that sweet, strange tale. You stand now at the edge of a narrow path lined with ankle-high fennel and crushed thyme. The morning light has mellowed, casting long shadows that stretch like lazy cats across the stony trail. You hear the buzzing before you see them, dozens, no hundreds of bees swarming, not in menace, but with method. They're spelling something in the air. Or maybe that's just the lack of breakfast talking. The boy with the crooked nose is gone. In his place is an older woman barefoot with a wreath of dried myrtle in her hair and something suspiciously sticky clinging to her elbows. She squints at you as if you've asked for oat milk in a Spartan tavern. "You want to know why the great Zeus turned into bees?" she says, one eyebrow rising like a sarcastic column. "Then you must first understand why he stopped being a cloud." You blink. Yes, a cloud. Because long before he was a swarm, he was a thundercloud, always brooding, always looming, occasionally tossing lightning bolts like passive-aggressive emojis at mortals who mispronounced his name. Here's a mainstream historical fact for you. The Greeks didn't just worship their gods they feared, flattered and flung roasted goat bits at them in the hopes of appeasement. Zeus in particular had a reputation for sudden storms, impulsive transformations, and a dating life that made tabloid editors cry tears of chaotic joy. But things changed when mortals got tired of being thundered at. They began praying to newer gods, gentler ones less likely to seduce their cousins while disguised as a swan. And that's when Zeus had what could only be described as a divine midlife crisis. He needed a rebrand. And nothing apparently says approachable yet powerful like a bee. Quirky tidbit. There exists a minor 2nd century text from an Alexandrian philosopher who claimed that bees were the only creatures Zeus could trust not to gossip. This may explain why Zeus chose bees as his avatar over, say, gossip-prone parrots or judgmental tortoises. Historians still argue whether this transformation tale originated in Attica's honey-producing hills or from the more mystic Orphic rites where bees symbolize the soul's journey through death and rebirth. Either way, someone somewhere wrote down the idea that Zeus didn't just send bees, he was the bees. You trail behind the priestess down a slope where almond blossoms drift like lazy snow. She leads you toward an ancient apiary, sun-warmed and humming. The hives are carved from stone, shaped like small amphorae with narrow slits just wide enough for a bee or a secret to slip through. She places your hand on one and tells you to listen. You press your ear against the cool rock. The sound inside is not just buzzing, it's rhythmic, layered, almost melodic, like someone whispering secrets in Morse code. A scholar once wrote that ancient Greeks believed bees carried messages between worlds, the living and the dead, the human and divine. And in this story, Zeus used them as his voice. He scattered himself into 1,000 wings. The transformation, the priestess continues, happened on the slopes of Mount Ida. There in a cave where nymphs once nursed the infant Zeus, he returned not as a baby, not as a storm, but as nectar, as drone and queen and worker all at once. You ask why bees. She shrugs, plucks a bit of comb from her satchel and hands it to you. "Taste it," she says. "Then tell me what other creature turns sunlight into sweetness." You do. It's floral and wild and faintly electric, like if lightning decided to host a dinner party in your mouth. The kind of taste that makes you believe a god might genuinely get jealous of a bee. You walk on feet, sticky ears, still humming with hive song. And up ahead the path forks. To the left, history. To the right, myth. You choose both. The trail curves toward a patch of olive trees whose trunks twist like dancers mid-pose, every knot a memory. You follow the priestess, or maybe it's a beekeeper now, into a grove littered with smooth stones and the molted husks of cicadas. She moves like she knows the ground will obey her feet. You follow like you're not sure if the bees are guiding you or watching you. A grove like this, she tells you, is where Zeus first heard the bees. They didn't speak with voices, at least not the kind you'd hear over brunch, but with rhythm. Pulsing vibrations that hummed through branches and burrowed into bones. That's how the gods used to talk, she says. Not in words, but in resonance. Here's a mainstream historical fact for your sleepy brain. The ancient Greeks often associated bees with prophecy. At Delphi, the priestesses of Apollo were called Melissae the bees because they buzzed with divine insight. They inhaled fumes, whispered truths, and probably freaked out more than a few farmer. And the beekeeping. Oh, it wasn't just about honey, it was rituals. Votive offerings of wax bees have been found buried in temple ruins across the Aegean. Some were tiny, detailed, down to the wings. Others giant and weirdly threatening because nothing says, "Please don't smite me," like an oversized wax insect. The priestess, who is now definitely wearing a veil made of netting, kneels beside a carved stone that looks suspiciously like a hive. You notice it hums faintly when the wind touches it. She brushes dust from the surface and reveals a relief, a figure with one arm raised and the lower half of his body dissolving into a spiral of bees. Not a metaphor, not a symbol, just Zeus. Unzipping his thundercloud suit and becoming what he had always feared, tiny plural mortal adjacent. You crouch beside her. So, he just became bees. She nods. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't punishing. He was listening. It's a quirky tidbit you didn't expect. The myth says Zeus scattered himself to escape the sound of prayers. Imagine being worshipped so hard that you break into insects just to get some peace and quiet. Historians still argue whether this strange variation comes from Thessalian shepherds who believed thunder was the buzzing of celestial bees, or if it was a joke among Athenian playwrights that spiraled out of hand. One surviving fragment from a lost comedy hints that Zeus was chased by his own echo and swarmed into silence. You lie back on the sun-warmed rock and feel the low thrum vibrating through your spine. A cicada stares at you with the unsettling stillness of someone who knows how you'll die. You look away. Above you, the sky is honey-colored. Clouds drift like lazy bees. For a moment, you think you can see a face in one, a bearded one with eyes that twinkle like fermented lightning. The priestess holds up a jar. Inside it, honey thick as myth. This was harvested during an eclipse, she says. It doesn't spoil, just like stories. She dips a twig and hands it to you. You taste it. This one's darker, earthy, like soil and secrets and rain that never fell. And then, as if nothing strange has happened at all, she stands and walks on. You rise a little dazed and follow. Behind you, the wind rustles the hive-shaped stone, and for a moment, it sounds like chuckling. Not yours. You trail after her through a narrow path flanked by poppies and thyme, the air dense with something you can't name. Maybe it's just humidity or the scent of pollen-soaked prophecy. The trees thin, and before you sprawls a rocky outcrop overlooking a hidden valley. She pauses at the edge, one sandal resting on a cracked slab etched with symbols. You squint. At first they look like weathered spirals, but then you realize it's a stylized swarm. A cyclone of bees swirling inward toward a central eye. Or maybe an entrance, or maybe a warning. She crouches beside it and says, "This is where the swarm first spoke." Not metaphorically, literally. She tells you that in this valley during a spring unlike any other, a hive began repeating the names of the gods in rapid succession: Zeus, Hera, Hermes, Hades, until it went silent. For good. They say that was the last time bees ever spoke out loud. After that, they just danced. Mainstream historical fact. Incoming honeybees perform intricate movements called waggle dances to share the location of nectar. Ancient Greek naturalists like Aristotle documented this behavior in surprisingly accurate detail. They didn't understand it all, but they knew bees were organized, precise, and frankly, a little too smart for comfort. The priestess touches a groove on the slab and hums. You don't want to alarm her, but your skin is starting to tingle. A breeze curls around you. It feels familiar, like déjà vu with wings. She explains that Zeus, in his more experimental moods, used the swarm as a disguise. Not to hide, but to visit. To slip between temple shadows and market stalls, eavesdropping on humans who thought they were alone. One Thessalian folktale tells of a man who confessed his sins to a bee in a wine jug. The next day, he found his goat blessed with twins and his wife suddenly less furious about the broken amphora. A quirky tidbit. The mythic bees of Dodona. Yes, the oracle place were said to land only on the truthful. One lie and the swarm would avoid you forever. Imagine being ghosted by insects. The priestess rises and walks on, passing beneath an arched fig tree. You follow every step cushioned by moss and uncertainty. Historians still argue she adds over her shoulder whether the bee oracle stories emerged independently in different city-states, or if there was a shared sacred text now lost. Some suggest it was an epic called Melissonomicon, or Book of the Bees. Others think it was just gossip that got very, very sticky. Your foot nudges a jar half buried in the soil. You dig it out carefully. The wax seal still holds, and stamped on top is a hexagonal sigil that hums when you touch it. The priestess doesn't even look back. "Keep it," she calls. That's for listening. You tuck it into your bag, though it might not exist. The valley narrows again. Ahead, a shallow cave flickers with torchlight. Inside, the priestess lights a wick in a honey lamp and hangs it from a stone hook. The shadows it casts shimmer like wings in flight. You sit beside her, cross-legged and suddenly sleepy. She tells you one final thing for the night. Zeus, when in swarm form, never stung. He tickled. His enemies would collapse in fits of hysterical giggling, clutching their sides as hundreds of tiny legs danced across their faces. An Athenian comedy fragment from the 4th century BCE hints at this, describing a divine swarm that attacked the prideful and left them with sore ribs and clearer minds. You can't confirm it, but you want to believe it. The shadows on the wall pulse gently. You close your eyes, and somewhere nearby a jar hums softly. You wake, or maybe you've never truly slept beneath the honey lamp now burned low to a stub. The priestess is gone. All that remains is a trail of golden dust leading deeper into the cave. You sigh. Of course. You rise and follow the trail, brushing against the rock wall where it narrows. Your shoulder scrapes a faint groove, another spiral. Always spirals. You count them as you walk 7, then 10, then 22. Each one slightly more angular, like the bees who carved them forgot what curves were supposed to be. You emerge into a larger chamber. High above, stalactites weep gentle drops into shallow pools. The floor is lined with hexagonal tiles, some cracked, others pristine. In the center, a mosaic depicts Zeus himself. Arms wide, cloak billowing, but his head just a shimmering cloud of bees. You try not to stare directly at it. The tesserae glint in the torchlight, and something about their geometry makes your vision wobble. According to the myths whispered in this region, one scholars often scoff that there was once a temple that didn't house a statue of a god, but rather a living swarm kept in eternal suspension by sacred vibrations. Visitors came not to pray but to listen. Supposedly, if you entered the temple during equinox and whispered your greatest question, the bees would swirl into a pattern that answered it mathematically, symbolically, or through pure emotional understanding. Mainstream historical fact. There was a temple in Ephesus dedicated to Artemis, where bees were considered divine servants. Priestesses were even referred to as Melissae, literally bees. The link between honey and holiness wasn't just poetic, it was bureaucratically enforced. You kneel near the mosaic and trace the tile outlines with your finger. The stone is warm, a fringe tidbit. One 1st century BCE scroll fragment recovered from a collapsed wine cellar near Rhodes claims that bees were once used as voting counters in trials. Each juror released a bee from a sealed gourd, and the bees would land on either the defendant or the accuser. Whichever drew the swarm's favor declared the winner. Historians still argue whether this was metaphor satire or actual judicial practice. To be fair, Greek law was a bit performative. You stand and move to the far end of the chamber where a wooden ladder leads upward. A single beeswax candle waits at the top rung, flickering without wind. You climb. Emerging into open air, you find yourself atop a plateau surrounded by cypress trees. The sky is shifting. Dawn, dusk, hard to tell. You step forward and your foot crunches on something brittle. You look down. Pollen everywhere. The grass is so thick with yellow dust it looks snowed upon, and the buzzing is louder now. Not aggressive, just constant, surrounding, familiar. You turn toward the trees and see her, the priestess. Again? Only now her robe is stitched with silver thread and bees land gently on her sleeves without stinging. She extends her hand and you take it without hesitation. She leads you toward a round and stone platform where jars are arranged in concentric rings. Some are open, others sealed with etched wax lids. She stops at the center and pulls a cloth from a bowl. Inside honey. You dip a finger. It tastes ancient and weirdly lemony. Lemony in time, she explains. Imported. Zeus insisted. You sit beside her as the sun or moon rises behind you. She tells you that Zeus didn't just become a swarm. He stored himself in them. Whenever he was overwhelmed, confused, or just tired of his own voice, he'd split his mind into thousands of tiny consciousnesses and let them live simpler lives, gathering nectar, bumping into flowers, chasing the wind. And when he was ready, he'd gather back up again, reassembled, recalibrated, slightly stickier. You chuckle. She smiles. Some gods take thunderbolts. She shrugs. Others take a break. You don't remember falling asleep, but you wake with honey crusted at the corner of your mouth and a few lazy bees napping on your ankle. The plateau is empty now. The priestess has vanished again, classic priestess behavior, and only the jars remain humming faintly. You stand, stretch, and scan the grove. A narrow trail winds between the cypress trees marked with symbols that feel familiar though you've never seen them before. One looks suspiciously like a coffee bean. You follow it anyway. As you walk, the path leads you through a shaded glade lined with carved wooden combs, each embedded into stone as if someone had tried to grow them like plants. Bees flit between the combs, tracing lazy figure eights in the air. The buzzing is rhythmic now, almost melodic. You wonder briefly if you're walking through a hymn. Mainstream historical fact. Viking combs have been found in Norse graves, lovingly carved, and often elaborately decorated, indicating just how important grooming was even in rough warrior cultures. But did you know similar combs show up in ancient Greece, especially in temples where bees were revered? Some scholars believe those combs weren't just for hair, but were sacred instruments used to comb sound into prayer. You pause before a particularly large comb that has a mirror-like bronze plate embedded into its handle. Your reflection is faint stretched. Behind you, though nothing is actually there, you see shapes shifting, buzzing, flickering in a halo. A swarm wearing a crown, fringe tidbit time. There's an old Cretan tablet that references the royal hive not as an object, but as a place where kings went to consult a spirit swarm. The record stops abruptly with the phrase, "He returned crowned, but did not speak for 7 years." Historians still argue whether this was a metaphor for trauma, a real silence, or just very bad PR. You walk on. Soon the trail widens into a clearing ringed by low stone seats, as if meant for an audience that never quite arrived. In the center, a pedestal supports a book made entirely of wax. You approach carefully. The cover bears a symbol you now recognize, a spiral, but with wings. You open the book and it melts instantly into golden ribbons that vanish into the air. No text, no explanation, just scent, smoke, time, and something faintly citrus. Somewhere behind you, a bell chimes. You turn and realize the bell isn't real. It's a bee. A single oversized bee hovering just at the edge of the clearing, wings vibrating at a pitch that makes the back of your teeth itch. You follow. It leads you to a moss-covered archway in the hillside. Beyond it, stairs. Always stairs. You descend. This time, the passage is lined with polished obsidian tiles that reflect dim light like still water. At first, it seems silent. Then you realize the buzzing is gone, replaced by soft whispers. Not words, just the memory of words. Like a dream you forget before you're even awake. You reach a round chamber where three figures sit at a triangular table, each with a candle, a jar of honey, and a stylus. They're writing, on air. No paper, no stone, just gestures. You watch. One finishes a phrase and turns her palm upward. From it, a single bee rises and hovers in place. Then another, then a third. You realize they're writing with bees. Each motion, each swirl becomes part of a larger shape suspended midair in delicate motion. You tilt your head, a spiral. The tallest figure finally speaks not in Greek, not in English, but in a tone that resonates somewhere behind your sternum. You seek the why, but you must taste the when. You have no idea what that means. But she offers you the jar, and you drink anyway. It's warm, spiced, almost peppery. You drank time, she says, now walk it. You step back from the chamber, and the air thickens. You blink, and suddenly you're in a different place. A mountain trail, olive trees, and someone in the distance shouting at a goat. Time, it seems, has turned again. You don't even try to ask how you got here. The air tastes different, brighter, sharper. Your sandals feel newer, less dusty. You glance down and realize they're made of woven reeds and something that might be silver thread. Did someone dress you while you weren't looking? Ahead, a shepherd boy waves frantically at his goat, which seems entirely uninterested in returning to the path. You pass them with a nod, and he shouts something in an accent that makes vowels bend like willow branches. You nod again, pretending to understand. You absolutely don't. A fork in the road. One side leads downhill into fields dotted with tiny beehive-shaped huts. The other winds up toward a temple perched dramatically on a rocky outcrop, because of course it does. The temple gleams white in the sun with banners fluttering like wings. Guess which path you take. Up you go. Halfway up, you pass a mural carved into the cliff wall. It shows a man made of bees, each insect detailed so precisely you expect them to fly off. His eyes are closed, his arms outstretched, and from his chest spills a golden liquid that forms rivers and roads, villages and vineyards. Mainstream fact. In some Greek myths, Zeus wasn't just fond of turning into animals to seduce mortals. He was also said to take elemental forms. Rain, wind, even mist. A lesser-known Orphic fragment suggests he once became a swarm of bees to evade detection by a jealous Hera, after yet another divine indiscretion. This version of Zeus doesn't roar thunder. He hums softly and leaves pollen behind. You press your fingers to the carved river expecting cold stone, but it pulses under your hand like a heartbeat, a fringe tidbit. There's a temple in Boeotia dedicated not to Zeus as king of the gods, but as Zeus Melilasios, Zeus of the bees. The cult that worshipped him there believed his true form was too sacred for statues, so they sculpted hives instead. Some archaeologists claim the ruins show concentric circles mimicking honeycomb patterns, though others argue it's just weather damage. Classic debate. You reach the top. The temple is smaller than it looked, cozy almost, more beehive than palace. Its entrance is guarded not by warriors, but by two enormous statues of women with wings instead of arms. Their faces are blank, their chins lifted slightly, judging your vibe probably. Inside, it's cool. The light shifts through amber-colored glass, casting hexagons on the floor. Incense coils in lazy loops. You're not alone. A robed woman stands before a stone basin, stirring its contents with a wooden rod shaped like a stinger. She turns to you and speaks your name, which is unsettling because you definitely didn't give it. You say nothing. She smiles and gestures to the basin. It's filled with a pale liquid that glows faintly in the gloom. She dips a ladle and pours some into a carved cup, handing it to you. The cup has no bottom. The liquid pours through and vanishes, yet your hand feels heavier, as if you're holding time itself. She whispers, "Drink when it buzzes." And just like that, the cup begins to hum. You tilt it toward your lips. The flavor is electric. Not sweet, not bitter, just sharp. Like biting into sunlight. Your feet lift. Not off the ground, just from the now. You float sideways through the walls, the sky, the years. You blink. You're back in the grove, but everything's older. Or newer. The trees are taller. Or shorter. There's a man now kneeling beside a tree stump. He's carving something. You sneak a glance. A bee, of course. He mutters about time and queens and nectar. He's wearing a crown that looks suspiciously like woven pollen. He turns and sees you. He says you too. You nod, unsure what he means. He shrugs. We all return eventually. Then he turns into bees. Not metaphorically, literally. Just dissolves into a swarm that rises, spins once around your head, then darts upward into a sky that now feels made of wax paper and candlelight. You sit down. You're not sure how long you've been walking, or when the walking became floating, or the floating became remembering, but the buzzing is back, and you feel yourself pulled toward another chamber, another layer of this absurd, delicious myth. You stand and follow. You follow the sound of bees, not just the hum of wings, but a rhythm, almost music. Like wind chimes made of amber and honeycomb, the temple disappears behind you as if it never existed. In its place, a rocky cave yawns open, exhaling a breeze that smells like cinnamon moss and something unmistakably floral. You hesitate. Who walks into a cave because it smells nice? You do, apparently. Your footsteps echo off damp stone. The walls are etched with zigzag patterns, some clearly decorative, others resembling writing. You spot a crude drawing of a man lying in a field, bees crawling over his chest, forming armor. Another shows a lion chased by bees. That one gets a chuckle. Mainstream fact. In Homeric epics, bees were often symbolic of both order and chaos. Their hives represented civilization, discipline, and divine favor. But their swarms unpredictable, dangerous. That duality is probably why gods like Zeus and Artemis were associated with them. They could bless or sting depending on their mood. Sound familiar? Your torch flickers, except you're not holding one. The cave lights itself somehow. Each symbol you pass seems to glow faintly as you near it. The drawings become more detailed until one wall is a full mural of Mount Olympus. Only this Olympus isn't quite right. Instead of marble halls and thunderbolts, it's dotted with beehives hanging from clouds like oversized fruit. The gods lounge lazily, Apollo strumming a honeycomb lyre, Hermes tossing jars of nectar to satyrs, Zeus mid-transformation. Half man, half swarm. You stare at his face, or rather the spot where his face was now a buzzing blur of golden dots. Quirky tidbit. An obscure Delphic hymn, barely a whisper in surviving records, claims Zeus once sent a swarm of bees to deliver dreams to mortals. Not messages, dreams. As in literal night visions seeded by pollen-dusted wings. This version of Zeus was less sky daddy and more dreamweaver. Sweet right. You walk deeper into the cave and the air thickens. Not uncomfortably, but richly. Like walking into a room filled with warm red lavender and just a hint of something metallic. Copper maybe? Or bronze? Old blood politely disguised. A new chamber opens, vast and circular. At its center stands a statue, not of a god but of a beekeeper. Hooded, robed, faceless. One hand holds a comb, the other a smoke wand. At their feet, bees frozen in stone cluster like a tide. You approach and the air shifts again. From above, drops fall, not water, but golden syrup. Thick, slow. It splashes the stone floor, and instead of sticking, it rings. Each drop a note in the cave's quiet melody. You look up. A honeycomb ceiling glows faintly. But instead of larvae, the cells contain tiny faces. Sleeping, smiling, whispering. You blink, they're gone. Or you imagined them. Historians still argue a sleepy voice murmurs near your ear, whether this chamber actually existed beneath the temple of Dodona, or whether it's simply a metaphor, an Orphic tradition for divine memory. You spin, no one's there. Or everyone is, it's hard to say. You back away slowly from the statue, but the chamber doesn't let you leave. Not yet. The honey continues to drip, each note louder, sharper. Then suddenly, silence. And in that silence, a single bee appears. It hovers in front of your face. You don't move. It lands on your nose. You still don't move. It buzzes once low and rumbling, and then dives into your ear. You hear nothing, then everything. Laughter, prayers, gossip from 1000 BCE. The voice of your 4th grade math teacher, somehow also there. Whispers of ancient rituals market haggling, the rustle of wind over chariots, the crackle of oracles baking barley bread. You stagger back and the chamber is gone. You're in a meadow, surrounded by statues of nymphs and bees carved into every surface. Trees, stones, even your own arms temporarily. The carvings fade as you blink like sleep dust brushed away too early. You sit, take a breath, and the bee, who is also maybe Zeus, sits on your knee like a polite guest. You ask it a question you don't remember forming. It nods and disappears into the tall grass. You lie down, stare at the sky, and wait for the next ripple in the story to carry you forward. You're still lying in that grass meadow-scented sky facing, probably in a completely metaphorical part of your brain when something buzzes past your cheek again. But this time it isn't just one bee. It's a dozen. Then 100. Then an entire river of them, glinting gold in the light-weaving patterns so precise they look choreographed. You sit up slowly. The bees form a shape, not random, not chaotic. A throne. Yes, really, a throne of bees. And on it sits no one, not yet. You step closer, careful not to crunch anything important beneath your sandals. Are you wearing sandals now? Whatever. A voice hums softly around the clearing. Not in words. It's like someone's tuning a cello underwater. Low, vibrational, slightly floral, mainstream, historical, fact. In certain Hellenistic traditions, bee cults weren't rare. In fact, priestesses at Delphi were sometimes referred to as melissae, literally bees. These women were said to deliver divine truths through trance-like humming, often surrounded by fragrant herbs like thyme or myrrh. So bees weren't just honeymakers, they were portable gods, tiny oracles on wings. You blink again and realize you're standing inside a circle of carved standing stones. They're arranged like teeth, or maybe petals or antennae, definitely one of those three. On each stone, more carvings. They seem familiar. One looks like an amphora. Another shows a woman pouring oil over a comb. One, your favorite, has a chubby satyr trying to pet a bee and immediately regretting it. His expression is universal. Mistakes were made? Suddenly, a warm breeze picks up. It carries pollen, scented glittering and just a bit sneeze-inducing. The bees swirl faster as if summoned. Then the shape appears. You don't see it form. You notice it's already been formed. Like you finally spotted the magician after watching The Hat too long. It's Zeus again, but different. This version isn't towering and muscular and flinging lightning like he's in a rock band poster. This version is quieter, thinner. His robe shimmers like wings. His beard is alarmingly made entirely of bees. He raises a hand, bees setter, then regroup to form a scepter. Quirky tidbit. There's an almost completely forgotten cult in southwest Anatolia near modern-day Turkey that believed Zeus's truest form was a swarm, not metaphorically. They genuinely worshipped a buzzing mass of stingers and pollen as the supreme being. Offerings included flowers, wax figurines, and tiny bowls of goat's milk. You kneel. You don't even mean to. Your legs just fold like laundry. The swarm Zeus buzzes once and suddenly the standing stones illuminate. Each carving glows faintly like fireflies trapped under parchment. Historians still argue whether "us" says a voice that seems to come from inside your molars. These carvings were instructional diagrams for rituals or simply divine graffiti by bored prophets with too much pollen access. The wind shifts again. You smell eucalyptus now, and lavender. Maybe basil. The throne dissolves. Zeus is gone, and in his place a mirror. Just a mirror, oval, framed in honeycomb, floating 2 feet off the ground because of course it is. You approach it cautiously. Your reflection stares back sleepy-eyed, faintly golden. Except behind your reflection someone else appears. Or something. You turn around, no one. Turn back to the mirror. They're still there. A woman, wearing a crown of thorns and bees, eyes closed, smiling faintly. And as you lean in, you realize the bees in the mirror aren't carved or drawn. They're moving, crawling along her skin, settling in her hair, hiding beneath her eyelids. Still she smiles. And then suddenly you're back in that cave. Same statue. Same drops of honey hitting the ground like forgotten songs. Same scent but warmer now. More familiar. You're not scared, just reverent. Which is a weird look on you, to be honest. You touch the statue's foot, and everything shivers. The wall behind it splits, revealing a narrow passageway, lit with soft gold, as if bees were lighting the way with their abdomens. You sigh. Of course there's another tunnel. You follow it, and this time you don't even flinch when the walls begin whispering again. This time, they're telling you a story you think you almost remember. You shuffle forward the golden-lit passage, narrowing with every step like the throat of a very polite, slightly sticky serpent. The walls breathe, not literally, of course, but the warmth pulses as if the stone had lungs. You try not to think about that too hard. It's bedtime after all. The whispers follow you. Louder now, clearer. They're recounting stories you somehow almost know, like dreams you woke up from 10 years ago but still remember the shape of. One name keeps drifting through the air, like the refrain of a lullaby. You didn't mean to learn Melissa. Melissa, the bee maiden. The one who supposedly discovered honey according to some not very peer-reviewed ancient accounts. Or maybe she was a nymph. Or maybe she was an entire tribe of women. Historians still argue whether Melissa was a single individual, a symbolic archetype, or just a title given to priestesses who didn't mind getting stung occasionally. You step into a chamber shaped like a beehive dome ceiling, hexagonal floor tiles and air so thick with honey scent, you're tempted to lick a wall. You don't, but barely. At the center, an altar. Not one of those blood and goat kind of altars. This one's made of wax, carved into spirals with soft amber drips frozen mid-slide. You touch it and your finger comes away warm, golden, slightly sticky. A low hum builds in the room. Not menacing, just expectant. You turn around and then that's when you see her. The woman from the mirror. She walks barefoot, her steps silent against the honeycomb tiles. Bees circle her like orbiting moons. She raises one eyebrow, and the buzzing hushes as if someone pressed pause on a harp made of wings. She doesn't speak, not with her mouth anyway. But you hear her, loud and clear. You were meant to see this, she says in a voice that sounds like candlelight smells. You, the dreamer, the wanderer, the one who asks what happens after the myth ends. You try to speak, but a bee lands on your lip like a punctuation mark. So you wait. She walks around you, trailing fingers along the air like she's painting invisible runes. Her scent is wild thyme cedarwood and something older. Something like lightning just before it strikes. Mainstream historical fact. In many pre-classical Greek sources, bees were viewed not just as creatures, but as soul carriers. Some believe that the spirits of the dead left the body as bees, tiny winged echoes of lives once lived. There are even burial urns shaped like beehives with narrow exits for the departed to fly free. Zeus chose the swarm, she says, almost wistfully, not for power, but for memory. And now you're beginning to understand. This isn't a story about thunderbolts and jealous goddesses and heroic nonsense. This is a story about a shape. About how a god tired of being seen only in storms and bronze statues decided to become small, countless, hidden, but everywhere. But, quirky tidbit. There's an obscure myth, barely a footnote really, in which Zeus, after one of his many exhausting arguments with Free, dissolves into a swarm of bees just to escape having to explain himself. According to this version, he spent 3 weeks pollinating lavender across the Aegean and came back with less rage and significantly better skin. You blink again, and the woman is closer now. She holds something in her hands. A bowl. It's filled with honey, not the fake grocery store kind, the good stuff. The kind that tastes like 1,000 sunrises and makes your teeth feel like they just got hugged. She offers it to you. You drink. And the moment it touches your tongue, everything slows. Not in the bad way, in the way time slows just before you fall asleep. She whispers again. Do you see now why the gods change shape? Why myths stretch like shadows? You nod. Of course you do. Historians still argue whether she murmurs this version of the story was meant to be literal or simply a metaphor for transformation memory and the importance of not picking fights with your wife when she's smarter than you. You laugh softly. The bees do too in their own way. The honey begins to hum inside you. You can feel it warm your limbs, slow your thoughts, coat your memories in something golden and less sharp. The chamber begins to melt. Not physically, don't worry, you're not standing in a puddle, but the walls soften. The air thickens and every buzzing sound starts to blend into a lullaby you don't remember learning. You sink to your knees beside the altar and the floor feels like moss. The bee woman kneels beside you. She touches your forehead. And suddenly, you're flying. Not metaphorically, you're actually flying. But not like a bird, like a bee. Tiny, weightless, golden. You hover above a field of wildflowers. Each petal glows. Each scent feels like a memory you didn't realize you missed. Below you, mortals dance. Gods argue, empires crumble. But you drift. You float. You listen. Because you're not here to rule. Not this time. You're here to remember. You drift downward, your wings catching the air like silk catching wind, until you land on the curled edge of a fig leaf. It shivers ever so slightly under your weight and then stills. Below you, the world buzzes along indifferent to your tiny golden self. You can see the whole garden now stretched like a lazy myth across the hills, fig trees, thyme clusters, and poppies nodding in time with an ancient breeze that probably once whispered secrets to nymphs with better posture than yours. Someone walks through the grove. A man this time, tall, bronzed, wearing the kind of tunic that screams, I'm pretending not to be important. But you know better. His hair is too carefully tousled. His sandals, too unnecessarily strappy. And his eyes. Those are the giveaway. They hold the look of someone who's been turned into a bird, a bull, a shower of gold, and now apparently a bee. Zeus, not thunderbolt-wielding, muscle-flexing Zeus, bee Zeus. You perch on his shoulder. He doesn't flinch. Instead, he sighs. You again, he mutters, not unkindly. Still dreaming. You buzz once. He nods like that's a fair answer. Historians still argue, he says, whether I took these forms because I needed to learn, or because I was avoiding accountability. He plucks a fig and peels it slowly, juice dripping down his fingers. I prefer the second theory. Far less pressure. Mainstream historical fact. In many classical sources, the gods of Olympus were known for their penchant for transformation, not just for seduction, but to hide escape or teach. Zeus alone is credited with transforming into over a dozen animals and natural phenomena. Each shift served a different purpose, sometimes symbolic, sometimes sneaky, often both. He offers a slice of fig to the air. A bee lands and sips. You're not that bee, but you feel the gesture. Melissa warned me, he continues. She said if I didn't stop chasing power and start listening, I'd lose the thread. You know, the golden one that connects every story. You nod if a bee can nod. You sort of vibrate thoughtfully. Thing is, he says gods aren't used to being small, to being quiet. But bees know how to carry whole gardens in silence. That's real power. Quirky tidbit. Some fringe scholars once proposed that the entire mythos of Zeus was built from early Mediterranean fertility cults centered around bees, bulls, and bread. According to them, Zeus may have once been a composite figure, part storm god, part honey spirit, part ancient bakery mascot. This theory never quite caught on, possibly due to the academic community's allergy to pastry-based deities. Zeus walks farther into the grove, you buzzing lazily beside him like a warm comma. He pauses before a small stone shrine, barely knee-high, carved with images of bees, serpents, and women dancing with wreaths in their hair. He kneels. Not something gods do often. He places the fig slice on the altar. You have to give something sweet, he says, half to himself, to be remembered kindly. You feel the truth of that settle into your tiny wings. You fly up higher now, circling above the shrine. The light filters through the olive trees, casting shadows in long, lazy stripes. And for a moment, just a flicker, you see yourself. Not a bee, not a person, not even a dreamer. You see yourself as part of the myth, not trapped in it, not tricked by it, but holding it, like nectar, like memory. The ground falls away and you drift once more, over rooftops shaped like turtle shells, over a market where women trade honeycombs for bronze needles, over a temple where someone lights a candle and whispers Melissa. And then, you're in a kitchen! Don't ask how, but it's ancient and cozy and smells like roasted barley and lavender tea. A woman stands at a low table grinding something with a stone mortar. She hums. You know the tune, though you've never heard it before. You land on a windowsill and watch her work. She presses honey into clay molds, shapes them like little bees, and wraps them in linen. Offerings, she says, to no one, or maybe to you. They say if you leave these out at night, the gods come in your sleep and fix things. She pauses. Not the big things, just the cracks. And you think maybe that's enough. Maybe the gods don't have to shatter mountains or part seas. Maybe they just need to fix the little cracks, the frayed edges, the forgotten dreams. She sets the molds on the sill beside you and smiles. You'll deliver them, won't you? She says. You don't know what to say, but you stay. And as night falls, the bees come drawn to the honey, yes, but also to the kindness, the quiet, the memory. They land softly, respectfully, and carry the sweetness away. To shrines, to dreams, to stories not yet told. The clay windowsill cools beneath you as the moon trades places with the sun, and the woman slips off to sleep. You remain behind wings, still body humming low like a kettle set just at simmer. Below you, the bees are already on their pilgrimage, darting in orderly disarray toward hidden places. Cracked altars, empty jars. The pages of unwritten myths. You, of course, have your own direction. You're drawn to it the way old compasses spin toward forgotten stars. You drift again over hills stitched with vineyards and sleepy goats that chew as if they're mulling over poetry. Then suddenly, you're somewhere drier, rougher. A slope of ochre rock tumbles below, and in its side yawns the entrance to a cave. The kind of cave that doesn't appear unless someone needs to find it. The kind that's been sealed and unsealed a dozen times by people who thought they were the first. You enter. And oh, it's cooler than expected. Honey sweet and chalk dry, the air carries the breath of centuries. The torchlight from nowhere flickers over walls etched with delicate lines. Bees, of course, but also flowers, stars, and one unmistakable figure, a woman, arms raised, bees orbiting her like planets around a quiet sun. Melissa, the first beekeeper. Mainstream historical fact. In Greek lore, Melissa is not only a name, but a title. It referred to the priestesses of Demeter and Artemis, women said to be capable of taming bees and interpreting their movements. These women were thought to be divinely guided mouthpieces of wisdom, and sometimes, depending on who was writing, terrifyingly powerful. The carvings shimmer in your compound eyes. Every bee etched with care, every petal curled like it remembers the hand that drew it. And then a whisper, not in your ear, bees don't have ears after all, but somewhere between your thoughts. I warned him, it says, but the boy never listens. You hover in place. From the shadows, a figure steps forward. Not Melissa herself, at least not in flesh, but a presence, a memory molded into voice and veil. She moves like wind through silk, her form outlined in gold dust, and something older than time. You've seen what happens when gods forget gentleness, she says. You hum once in agreement, the sound oddly reverent. She nods. Still, it is not their stories that endure. It's the rituals, the small sweet things. Bread left on windowsills, bees carved into rings, honey poured in silence. She kneels and dips her finger into a crack in the cave floor. A trickle of honey seeps up somehow from the earth itself. You know better than to ask. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient cultures believed caves had veins of sacred honey running beneath them. Nectar that only flowed during celestial alignments or after specific chants. While modern archaeologists find no such rivers exist, and geology agrees remnants of sealed clay vessels filled with honey have been found in Minoan sanctuaries, hinting that the myth may have had its sticky roots in reality. Melissa holds out the honey on her fingertip. Take it, she says. You do. With a tiny sip, the sweetness floods you thicker than memory, warmer than sunlight. You feel stories wake in your cells, names you didn't know you knew, places that shimmer like dew before dawn. You'll carry this, she says, until the next storm. And just like that, she's gone. The cave dims, but you remain glowing faintly from within. You fly upward higher than before, through the roof of the cave, through layers of time, past shepherds arguing over whose goat snuck into whose barley, past scribes spilling ink and blaming cats, past philosophers trying to trap the meaning of everything in a sentence and missing it by a syllable. You emerge into a city, Athens maybe, or somewhere trying very hard to be. The streets are marble-veined and sunlit, but there's tension in the air. Statues watch you with cracked expressions. The people below bustle, barter, pray, but something's missing. You buzz toward the agora. There in the center, a man stands on a makeshift platform. He's shouting something about justice, about storms, about the need to rebuild not temples, but stories. You land on his shoulder. He freezes mid-sentence. You hum gently, a reminder. He exhales, then smiles. Not a god, not even a hero, just someone ready to remember. Historians still argue, he says aloud, whether myth shapes behavior or behavior shapes myth. But I say maybe it's the bees who shape both. There's a chuckle from the crowd, confused but charmed. He continues gentler now, telling a story about the boy who became thunder, the woman who warned him, and the bees who remembered when no one else would. And as he speaks, a child near the edge of the square traces something in the dust with a stick. It's clumsy, wobbly, but you recognize it. A bee, drawn with love. Maybe that's enough. You drift from the square with a full heart and wings that hum like soft applause. The sun dips lower now, casting the city in amber. It's the hour where even statues seem to exhale, where marble lions and gods with broken noses lean into the hush and let the day melt from their chiseled brows. Your journey isn't done, though. You zigzag between rooftops and temple pillars, slipping unnoticed through the threads of memory. Every place you pass holds a little echo of your story now. Someone scrawls a poem about thunder in the margins of a shopping list. Someone else leaves a slice of honeycomb on their doorstep, not for the gods, but for whatever listens. Still, something tugs you onward, back toward the mountains. Past a herd of goats who frankly have better social order than most city-states. Past a shepherd who hums off-key but means well. And back, yes, back to the woman. She's older now, just a little. There are more lines around her eyes, but she wears them like laurels. She still gathers herbs in the mornings, still sings to her bees in a voice as cracked and beautiful as old pottery. But now her hive has doubled. The bees are thriving. Her garden practically glows. And when you arrive, she's waiting. Oh, she says, not surprised. You came back. You land on her fingertip, the same one that once cupped you gently when you were still more god than insect. Now you are something softer, a memory disguised as wings, a blessing without thunder. Mainstream historical fact. Viking and early Greek societies both associated bees with divine messengers. In some rural regions of Greece, it was once customary to tell the bees when a family member died, whispering the news to the hive so the bees could carry the soul onward or mourn alongside the family. It was said that failing to do so might make the hive abandon you entirely. She kneels in front of the hive. This one, she murmurs, came back changed. She sets you gently on the lip of the wooden frame. The bees swarm up not in alarm but in recognition. They sense something familiar, something holy, something ridiculous and slightly storm-scented if we're being honest. And then, with no ceremony at all, they nudge you inside. You join them not as Zeus, not as lightning, but as one of them. Worker, messenger, keeper of memory. Inside the hive, the world smells like wax and wonder. Every cell is a room full of story. You crawl past the chamber where the pollen is stored neatly, reverently. You linger at the wall where the youngest bees are learning the waggle dance clumsily but with enthusiasm. And then you find it, a small, nearly hidden chamber. Inside, a symbol carved into wax, an eye, a cloud, a bolt of lightning, and beneath them the shape of a bee. Quirky tidbit. Some archaeologists believe that early forms of symbolic writing like Linear A or Proto-Canaanite scripts may have been inspired by natural patterns including insect movement. While the claim's a bit fringe, there's a theory floating around that the waggle dance of bees was humanity's first lesson in directional language. Imagine that. Your GPS owes itself to a dancing bee. The hive hums around you, and you realize this is what gods are for? Not thunder, not punishment, not golden thrones with velvet cushions, but memory. You fly out again not because you're restless, but because the story isn't over. You travel further this time, across oceans that roll like the backs of sleeping whales, through clouds that smell faintly of citrus and forgotten prayers. You dip into other hives, some old, some new. Some made by hands, others born wild in tree hollows and cracked stone. And in every one you leave something behind. A scent, a story, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, the gods once turned into bees not to punish but to listen. Historians still argue whether this myth ever existed in the official scrolls. Most scholars will tell you no, that there's no canonical source for Zeus becoming bees, that it's likely a folk invention, a whisper passed between storytellers too tired of thunder and too fond of flowers. But those historians have never met you, and they've never listened close enough to a hive in full song. You pass over one last village. A child there sleeps with a carved wooden bee under their pillow. A grandmother hums as she spreads honey on bread and tells the tale again, just slightly wrong, but wrong in the best possible way. Wrong in the way that makes myths live longer than marble ever will. And then you rest, not because your story is finished, but because it's been heard. The bees, after all, don't need to shout. They just keep buzzing. Somewhere beneath a pine-scented dusk, you hover in place, neither god nor ghost, just a flicker of memory with wings. You're not quite bound to Olympus anymore. That mountain, once your soapbox and your thunder throne, now feels like someone else's dream. And frankly, you're not missing it. You skim over the coast, salty wind buffeting your wings, the last streaks of sun snagging in the waxy amber of your tiny body. Far below, people begin lighting lamps. Olive oil wicks glowing like miniature suns against whitewashed walls. And each household, whether they believe in gods or just good luck, seems to keep a little jar of honey near the door. An offering. Or maybe just breakfast. You touch down on the edge of a reed basket. Inside scrolls, maps, a child's attempt at a poem comparing Apollo's lyre to a clumsy fish. The house belongs to a scribe. His ink-stained fingers tap against his lip as he squints at a wax tablet. And you realize he's trying to remember the tale of the bees, the one his grandmother told. Something about thunder and clouds and a god who shrank down to learn something softer. He's almost got it. He mumbles, "Was it Hermes? No. No too polite to be Hermes." You crawl along the edge of his tablet. He doesn't see you, but he starts writing again. This time with more certainty. A god, a swarm, a lesson. Mainstream historical fact. In the Hellenistic world, bees weren't just admired, they were institutionalized. Temples kept them as sacred companions. The Delphic oracle herself was known as the Delphic bee, and priestesses were said to murmur like bees when caught up in divine frenzy. It wasn't thunder that brought truth, it was vibration. Gentle rhythmic humming, the kind you're making now. As you leave the scribe's roof, you head north over hills of wild thyme and stubborn sheep until you land beside another woman. Not the same one, not the one who helped you learn to listen, but one like her. She has the same calloused hands, the same way of talking to the wind like it might answer. She's kneeling beside a beehive, coaxing smoke through a little funnel, whispering apologies for the intrusion. You watch her work. She lifts the frames gently, checks the comb for mites, hums softly some tune half remembered from childhood. She wears no armor, no laurels, just a band of linen tied around her head to keep her hair back and the sweat out of her eyes. Quirky tidbit. Bees can recognize human faces up to a point. In one famous experiment, researchers trained bees to distinguish between photos of people, and they succeeded. You're struck by the idea that these tiny creatures who've been around since the dinosaurs snacked on ferns can remember your face if they care to. The woman closes the hive and bows her head. Not in worship, but in respect. Maybe she knows the stories. Maybe she's heard the whispers about the god who turned into a swarm and never quite turned back. Or maybe she's just grateful the bees are thriving this year. You take flight again, trailing behind her as she returns home. There's bread baking. She hums to the dough too. Everyone in this world seems to hum like they're trying to join in on a song too old for sheet music. A young girl runs up to her. "Did you see it?" she asks. "What?" A bee with a glow. Not like a firefly, different. The woman pauses. "No," she says, "but maybe it saw me." Historians still argue whether this bee reverence among ancient peoples was religious symbolic or just practical admiration for honey. Some claim the mythology was retrofitted, stitched into stories centuries later to justify old habits. Others insist the reverence came first, that somewhere, somehow, someone really did believe that gods shrank into bees and lived among them. You're not here to win an argument. You're here because someone remembered you. Because someone whispered your name into honey and the hive carried it onward. Because people keep writing stories. New ones, wrong ones, lovely lopsided ones. You land on the window frame of a girl who's sketching. She's drawing a bee with 7 wings and a crown of stars. Historically inaccurate but charming. You approve. You hum once. She looks up, smiles, doesn't swat. And as the stars bloom in the inkwell of the sky, you realize something. Maybe gods don't need temples, or altars, or the thunderous drama of mountaintop declarations. Maybe they just need stories, small ones, passed down like recipes, shared over tea, scribbled in margins, told at bedtime by people who never quite remember the ending but remember the feeling. You rest on the tip of her quill. She dips it in ink and keeps writing. And though she'll never know it, you're helping her spell your name. You drift now slower than before. Not just because your wings tire bees divine, or otherwise weren't made for endless flight, but because the air itself thickens with night. Shadows stretch out like soft rugs across the hills. Cicadas hush one by one like stagehands dimming lights. You pass over olive groves where nothing moves but the breeze, and that too is beginning to fall asleep. But you still have one place left to visit. It's an island. All crescent-shaped. The kind where myths like to linger long after they've gone out of fashion. There's a cave near the northern ridge carved into volcanic stone, warm in winter, and cool in summer, and echoing just enough to make even the smallest whisper sound like prophecy. You slip through the crevice and land on the lip of an old offering bowl. Inside, a few dried figs, a sliver of cheese, and of course, a drop of honey. You remember this cave. In the early days, it echoed with declarations. Oaths, arguments, probably a few Zeusian temper tantrums too. But now it's quiet, not abandoned, just waiting. Mainstream historical fact. The ancient Greeks often associated caves with beginnings. Zeus himself, according to some legends, was raised in a cave on Crete, hidden from his hungry father Cronus, from darkness light, from isolation dominion, and sometimes from silent stories. You curl into the bowl just for a moment. The stone is warm from the day's sun, and the honey glows faintly in the moonlight. Someone enters, bare feet on dust. A child. He isn't here to worship. He's here to listen. You can tell he carries no incense, no wine, no borrowed prayers. Just a blanket under one arm and a satchel full of wax tablets under the other. He kneels by the bowl, sees you, and smiles like he's found a secret. You're the one he whispers. You hum once. He opens a tablet and begins to write, not in Greek, not in Latin, but in some language still forming, still soft and molten and eager. You peek over his shoulder. The first line. There once was a god who became a swarm of bees. You don't correct him. Quirky tidbit. In some variations of pre-Hellenic myth, bees were seen as soul carriers, psychopomps that ferried the dead to the afterlife. Not grim or gloomy, just busy efficient. Imagine dying and being escorted to eternity by a cloud of buzzing golden couriers. You'd hope they don't get distracted by wildflowers. The boy writes until his eyelids droop. Then he curls up in the cave's arms and sleeps. And you, though you are still a swarm, feel yourself settle beside him like a lullaby. Historians still argue whether myths like yours were meant to be metaphor, morality tale, or mere entertainment. Some say Zeus's bee form was symbolic humility, rebirth, transformation. Others claim it was invented by rural storytellers who wanted to explain why beehives sometimes seemed divinely protected. There's even one scholar who swears the story's a mistranslation, that it wasn't bees at all but breeze, which honestly would make a lot less sense. You choose not to weigh in. Instead, you rise one final time, not as punishment or revelation, but as a good night. You drift upward past the mouth of the cave into the sky. There are no stars tonight, just clouds, silver-edged and whispering secrets to each other. You nestle between them, invisible, humming a song only gods and honey-drunk shepherds can remember. And down below, in 1,000 homes scattered across islands and hills and valleys, stories start to stir. One child dreams of bees whispering in her ear. An old woman stirs her tea clockwise, mumbling something about Zeus and honey. A potter paints a lid with a golden insect and doesn't know why. A sleepwalker steps outside barefoot and follows a humming that leads nowhere in particular but feels like home. You are not forgotten. You're just quieter now. And as the last breeze nudges you toward the horizon, you think, maybe that's all any god ever wanted. To be part of the hum. To be whispered in sleep. To be the pause between heartbeats when the world is almost still. And now, you are. The air softens around you. Your wings or thoughts or whatever remains of them begin to slow. You're no longer flying, you're floating. No destination, no deadline, just drifting through velvet skies guided only by the gentle rhythm of night. Below, the land grows dim and quiet. Trees melt into hills. Hills dissolve into shadows. Even the bees have stopped buzzing. They've tucked themselves into their honeycombed beds, each snug in its own tiny cell, dreaming perhaps of flowers that bloom only in memory. You follow the slow curl of smoke from a distant hearth. It spirals upward, lazy and content, before vanishing into the stars, or maybe joining them. You can't tell anymore. Everything feels softer now, as if the world is exhaling. A story once sharp and strange now rests beside you like a warm blanket. You don't need to understand it. You only need to feel it, cradle you to let it murmur you towards sleep. So you do. You let the last flicker of thought fade. Let the hum of old gods carry you. Let the world go quiet, one heartbeat at a time. You're safe here. You're home. Sleep well.